little hot, if you could bring it down. I'm on fire. And the mic's on fire. There we go. We just bring it down even a fraction more. It's kind of bouncing back at me. I'm hearing me. How's that? There we go. Thank you. When the sound man gets annoyed with the preacher, you learn to forgive your enemies, whether they wear red or white socks. It's just part of the thing. You learn to forgive quickly. Forgive me, brother. What a great privilege to be with you, dealing with a subject that is so important to me, leadership. I've rewritten the book that you have called Christian Leadership. I will change the title to Spiritual Leadership. And you get in part 1 and part 2. In the future, it will be one book. It's written, it's rewritten, it's in final edit, the cover's been done, and that will be launched in 2026 in my school program. But the book itself will be sold separately as a book as well as part of the curriculum. And the reason I rewrote it is because I have made thousands, hundreds of thousands of disciples. And if you understand my core values for the school, believer, member, minister, leader, reproducer, world changer. To make a world changer, I've got to get people secure in their personal walk, their corporate walk, their ministry walk, their leadership walk. But then there's another level, and Jesus epitomizes that level because that's the reproducer. If many churches raise up a leadership team, but they never become reproducers, so they grow to a point, and that's where the church will stay, because the ministry of Jesus is the reproducer. He's the firstborn among many brethren. Even in the book of Genesis, it starts with the law of God, the law of reproduction. Everything God created is reproducing. Within the seed is the life, and the same within the kingdom. And so to change the world, to reach the world, we have to raise the world, to raise up leaders who will reach the world. Leaders make a difference. One of the ways that I define a leader is if you're a follower, you hate change. You are insecure when there's change. But when you're a leader, you crave change. You hate the status quo. You don't want business as usual. You're always trying to stretch the boundaries to take yourself further, the business further, the marriage further, the church further, the organization further. You are never satisfied. And even when you reach goals and fulfill vision, you're saying to God, what's my next steps? Because you thrive in the environment of change. Leaders love change, followers hate change. Jesus came and changed the world. The calendar has changed from Jesus. BC, AD. He's the greatest of all world changers. And that's what I'm trying to raise up is not just leaders, but reproducers that make world changes. My core values are, if I can get my students to be lovers of God and then love one another, the greatest commandment, the new commandment is to love one another. The first commandment, the greatest commandment, is to love God. But then Jesus said a new commandment, not canceling out that first commandment, but saying this actually now transcends from just loving God who you can't see to actually loving one another that you can see. And this will become the calling card of the church. They will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. And I found that if I can get my students to love God and love one another, then what will happen is commitment is there, generosity is there, sacrifice is there, loyalty is there, faithfulness is there. The moment love is removed, people become unfaithful. The moment love is removed, they become disloyal. But love makes us. The world changes with godly character, but is born in our love for God and demonstrated in our love for one another. Secondly, I want my students to be loyal to the church. Another way of saying it is to love the church. Christ, having loved the church, gave himself for it. And I know that at times the church can be dysfunctional, that within our humanity, the frailty sometimes manifests in weakness, and that discourages people because they see the Gospels, they see the ministry of Jesus, this perfect leader, and then they meet us, and then something's missing. But the truth is, we are all under construction. We're all growing in grace and in the knowledge of God. None of us have arrived. In other words, we are, and we're becoming what we are. The revelation of knowing who you are in Him. So when you know who you are in Him, you quickly realize, I know who I am. I know whose I am. But there's a whole lot of change needed. We call it the transforming of the renewing of the mind, transformation, where we are being shaped and conformed to the image of Jesus. And so part of that transformation takes place in the midst of imperfection, in the midst of ourselves. We are perfect in the blood of Jesus. In Ephesians 4, it speaks about growing to the full measure of the stature of the Lord Jesus Christ. That is not only a personal goal for our lives to become like Him, but it's our corporate goal that collectively we become like Him. But that means change, and leaders bring change. And so if I can get people to love the church and to be loyal to the church, I've done a great work. Because there is such a fragmentation taking place within the kingdom. People don't even, and I say this without kind of like a guilt motivation, people don't even attend church because they don't like it. And it's not the meeting they don't like one another. And that's a huge problem. Like, how do we become world evangelists to get people saved and then to get them assimilated into the life of the church if we don't even like the church? If we're intolerant of our humanity, that is part of my goal, is in my school to teach this balanced worldview of the church, the glorious church, the magnificent church. If Solomon's temple was glorious and magnificent and famous, we, the construction of God, must be greater than Solomon's temple. That the whole world gazes upon us and sees the manifest glory of God. So that's my goal. Number 3, I want my students to have a passion for the harvest, that we feel the heartbeat of God, that we look unto the fields that are white unto harvest, and we see that, some were saying, let's wait a few months. They're always finding a reason not to. I'm finding a reason to have to want to crave to reach this generation. And then number 4, I want my students to be Spirit-filled, which I prefer saying God-possessed, with character. And you've all studied the book, Christian Character. And then lastly, I want to raise up my students to be a generation of leaders, because leaders bring change. And if we're going to change lives, leaders do that. If you lead someone to Christ, that makes you a leader. If you're a father, you're a leader. If you're a mother, you're a leader. If you're a grandparent, you're a leader. If you're an uncle, you're an aunt, you're a leader to your family. You're an example. And then in society, we need leaders in education, in the arts, in entertainment, in every level who will project Jesus into that world to be a voice for the gospel, for the kingdom of God. And then what about just raising up leaders in the church? And so that's part of my goal, and that's why we have 2 books, which will become 1 book dedicated to the subject of leadership, because it's that important to me to raise up a generation of leaders. Jesus began his ministry in Mark chapter 1 and verses 16 and 18. You will know the scripture very well. And he walked by the Sea of Galilee, and he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, and they were fishermen. Then Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." They immediately left their nets and followed him. Jesus made them more than fishers of men. He made them leaders and apostles to the first generation church, who would be the continuum until the return of Jesus. Jesus raised these ordinary people not just to catch men, to be fishers of men, but to be world leaders, world-changing leaders, that after his death, resurrection, and ascension, that the entrustment of the world would be placed into their hands. And from generation to generation, the mantle has been handed, just like Elijah to Elisha, from them to that next generation, to the next generation. And here we are 2,000 years later. The mantle has come upon our lives to be raised to be the continuum of what Jesus did in these simple, ordinary people's lives, making them more than fishermen, but leaders. And I feel like one of the hindrances to the success of the church has been that we make members, partners, an audience, but we don't even make good members. We put very few demands on the people. It's more or less on their terms. Jesus was very specific in his call. It was on his terms. He didn't raise up a soft-bellied generation of followers. He was very clear: if you're going to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. There's a deep call that he placed upon them. Raising up spiritual leaders, Christian leaders, there has to be a very high level of commitment, which again is embodied in Jesus. The ultimate of sacrificial, selfless, serving leaders is seen in his life and ministry. He is the ultimate example. Paul said, "Follow me." His life was an example, but he also said, "As I follow Christ." So our ultimate example is Jesus, and that's why this leadership manual is devoted to Jesus, the ultimate leader. I have studied every leader in the Bible, every prophet in the Bible. I can write a book on every one of them, on their strengths, on their weaknesses. I have studied their lives. One of the greatest leaders for me is Nehemiah. I spent years studying his life as a servant, but also who became a leader. And there's so many great qualities, but the truth is, even my greatest Bible character, Nehemiah, Peter, James, John, Paul, great apostles, Barnabas, every one of them had such wonderful qualities and traits, but Jesus surpasses them all. We all pale in comparison to the leader of leaders. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is the leader of the church. He is the head of the body. He is the bridegroom of the church. He is the builder and the possessor. He is the ultimate of all leaders. We call him Lord, or ultimate authority, the highest authority, because he is the epitome of Christian leadership or spiritual leadership. When he said, "Follow me," it was with the process of making others like him. Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. But what was he doing? He was setting an example of what true leadership would look like. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, but you remember at the Last Supper when they came in, they wanted to sit on his left and his right and be close to him at the table, but none wanted to wash the feet. 3 years of teaching, training, and he's coming to the culmination of his ministry. And even though he had taught them true greatness is in becoming the servant, they hadn't grasped it. They didn't get it. And for us in the Western world, especially in the United States of America, we almost have this, and I say it kindly as a citizen of this nation, we have this thing, we're the greatest nation of the world. That's our declaration of ourselves. There are many great nations, humble people, good nations, but we have this inflated image. Unfortunately, that has got into the church. And we have a whole lot of ego in the church, where the ministry of Jesus was not built around ego. It was built around character. It was built around sacrifice. It was built around his vision, his message, what he embodied. And we, in leadership, and there are thousands of books on leadership, but the ultimate of all leaders is not what the world projects. It's the kingdom leadership, the true greatness that we're after, this biblical model that is found in Jesus, the ultimate of all leaders. When we follow him, we become like him. And that's what this course is all about, to learn from the greatest of all leaders. If we allow him into our lives, he will change us and mold us and shape us to be like him. Because again, and I've said this earlier, he is the firstborn among many brethren. In other words, we must embody who he is in our generation, not shaped by the culture of this nation, but shaped by the culture of the Word, by the kingdom culture, the highest of all cultures. He exemplified humility, servant-heartedness, compassion, wisdom, and obedience to the Father. His leadership was marked by love, grace, truth, and he prioritized the well-being of all who he led. He was always about the people. He wasn't about building his reputation. He was always about meeting the needs of the people that he'd come to serve and to die for. He modeled sacrificial love, forgiveness, selflessness. He wasn't on a power trip. He wasn't seeking prominence. He was seeking opportunity to serve the people around him and pointing them ultimately to the Father and to the will of God, revealing the love of God. And I think that's what's needed, and that's what I want us to get out of this module, is to be shaped and to be forged by the revelation of who Jesus is. The truth is, many today who once served God and loved God have left the church because of failed leadership. And when you stand and you say this, you have to be very careful, because you become judged more strictly by what you say. But there's been a lot of abuse in the church through failed leadership. hurt lives. We've got a lot of ground to gain, but before we can even gain new ground, we've got a lot of lost ground that we need to regain. And it again starts with leadership, doesn't it? I mean, I use the example that I quote so often, the 10 spies. There were 12 spies, but there's the 10. Let's name them. Let's start in alphabetical order. Who shall we start with? Who's got one name of the 10? Of the 10 spies, not of the tribes, of the spies. Anyone? Why don't we memorize their names? Because they were leaders who failed in the God-given assignment. No one remembers their names, but we all remember Joshua and Caleb. Why? Because they did the will of God. They were the leaders we would like to model ourselves after. The 10 were leaders of the tribes. They were warriors. They'd probably been battle proven, and when Moses selected them, he gave them the assignment to go in and spy the land. Instead of coming back with a strategy to reach the land, they came back with what? An opinion. They were meant to come back with a strategy. They came back with an opinion. Joshua and Caleb came back with fruit, the evidence of what was before them. They came back with the evil report, and the evil report was there's giants in the land and there's fortified cities. That wasn't the evil report that they knew going into the land. What was the evil report? We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were, and so they were, and they died, but they were so influential, those 10. Listen to this. Moses delivered them by the hand of God from Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea, Moses right up front. They came out, none feeble among them, provided provision, walked on dry land through the Red Sea. The water covered Pharaoh's army, and that's a pretty good leader. That's a successful leader. Bread, manna every day, water from the rock. That's a pretty cool leader. But the volume of his voice, with all the supernatural coming down the mountain, shining that they've got to put a veil on his face, they forgot that. They forgot that he brought the law of God. They forgot that he made a way for them, provided for them as the servant of God. They forgot all that. They heard the voice of 10 leaders. And had it not been for the glory that descended, they would have killed Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. The glory of God came down and protected them. The millions of people that came out of the promised land, there was, I think, 600,000 men and women and children. They estimate somewhere between 2 and 3 million people that came out of Egypt. Those people turned against Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. Good spiritual leaders were silenced by the voice of negative leaders. Tell me that leaders don't have influence. You can lead people closer to God, or in their case, you can lead them away from God. Leaders carry a tremendous responsibility. Jesus led people to the Father, to the will of God. He revealed the Father, revealed the love of God, revealed the salvation of God. But those spies are always in the back of my mind, that as leaders, the volume of their voice was louder than Moses. Wow. So leaders lead, people follow. And they set a course that caused every adult to die, missing what God gave them. 10 leaders. Churches are damaged because of 10 leaders. People that do things, say things, wound the people, and separate. as leaders, we have to be so careful how we walk, how we talk, the example that we set, the standards that we live, because that can either win or lose people. And that's why I say we need a new generation of leaders to be raised up, because the truth is the church today is kind of stuck in a rut. But there's a new generation. We saw that with the Olympics, didn't we? Of course, the parade was a disaster. The Australian breakdancer, let me hold that there. She gave it all she had, which wasn't much. But the big thing is that I watched some of these young superstars coming up, setting standards of excellence, of commitment, of speed, of strength. And really, we need as the church to raise up a new generation that will go further than Pastor Mike and Sherry, Pastor Jay, Pastor or Dr. Leon. We need a new generation that will go way further. Because what we've done is taken it so far. But we need a generation that will take it until the whole earth be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the earth. And so I'm very committed to raising up leaders for that purpose, because I can see this is where change begins. Both negative change and positive change is in leaders. I believe every member of the church, every believer is potentially a leader, even though they may not feel gifted or called. And I'll tell you why every believer has the potential to be a leader. Because as he is, so are we. And if he is the leader of all leaders, and the King of all kings, and the Lord of all lords, and we are born of God in his image and likeness, then surely there is something of this world leadership potentially embodied in each one. But will we access it? Will we pay a price to get it out? To fulfill it, to go after it. And so I'm very passionate about the leaders. How many of you remember when President George W. Bush stood on that aircraft carrier and he put the big banner, "Mission Accomplished"? 20 years later, under President Joe Biden, we left billions of dollars worth of equipment, precious, valuable armaments of war that are now in the hands of Taliban. And George W. Bush made an outrageous statement when he stood and he said, "Mission accomplished." It was hardly an accomplishment. They had just put their big toe in the water. It was very arrogant. Jesus actually accomplished the goal. He said, "It is finished." He actually did. He did it. Most leaders never fulfill their destiny. Jesus did. And I love that moment when he said, "It is finished." Because at that moment, the curtain was torn from top to bottom by the hand of God. And that which was housed in that temple or tabernacle in the most holy place that could only be accessed once a year by the high priest after much ablutions, preparations, and sacrifices, now has become our habitation. Mission accomplished. Every leader must know that there's going to be a time when we've got to end our race. Paul ran his race and he finished it. He said, "I've done what was entrusted to me. I kept the faith." And every one of you is potentially a leader. Maybe some of you are in different levels of leadership. You've got to make sure that you fulfill your God-given assignment. I say to people, you don't have the right to die, because to die is gain. You shouldn't have the pleasure of dying before you can say, I've done what God gave me to do. And we've got a lot of work to do. Amen. And so we should be engaged. Jesus actually accomplished the mission. He's the ultimate of all leaders. He did what the Father gave him to do, and he paid the price to fulfill that. And so we want to celebrate his accomplishments. I want to give you some definitions of leadership. These are from different world leaders. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. Every one of these definitions are good. I hope my definition will be better. I say that arrogantly with humility. John Maxwell said the best leaders are those most interested in surrounding themselves with assistants and associates smarter than they are. I like that. Very humble position. Simon Sinek said, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. I like that as well. Paul Polman, leadership is not just about giving energy, it's unleashing other people's energy. In other words, awakening their destiny. And we see that in Jesus, don't we? Jesus was interested in the people around him. Every definition here is really shows something of the ministry of Jesus. Jesus certainly unleashed the energy within others. President Ronald Reagan said, the greatest leader is not necessarily the one who does the greatest things. He is the one who gets the people to do the greatest things. And of course, that's like the Great Commission. It's getting the people to fulfill the will of God. Jesus did what he had to do, but he now entrusted it to us. And that's what great leaders do. Ralph Nader, he said the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. I like that. Jesus said, follow me, but he wasn't trying to just have followers, keeping them in a state of immaturity. He wanted to raise them to the reproducing to become leaders and leader makers. Follow me and I will make you go and make. Douglas MacArthur said, a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. I like his definition as well. Because as leaders, we make decisions. We are decision makers. We have to, and this is not a politically correct term these days, you have to pull the trigger. You have to make the decision. You've got to make the call. You've got to take the risks. But it's not just making decisions and making tough decisions, but it's to listen to the heartbeat of the people around you in making those decisions. I often think of Moses spending 40 years in the wilderness with a grumbling, murmuring people. I know eventually he struck the rock when he should have spoken to the rock. That cost him severely. And of course Moses wrote about Moses saying that he's the most humble of all leaders. He was a great leader with a tremendous amount of patience. He walked at the pace of the people. He could have got them there in days, but it took years to even get them to the banks, because he was trying to change them from being slaves to warriors and a people that could handle the responsibility of wealth by living generously before God. So he had to break the spirit of poverty, the spirit of servitude off them to make them leaders and conquerors and winners. And he had a lot of patience in that, which eventually ran out. And as a very humble leader myself, writing about myself, I can say, I think I could have struck the rock. quite easily, if not the rock, I would have struck them because I'm a little bit more violent than Moses. People can be a tremendous frustration to a strong-willed leader. They can hold you back. And I see in this definition of Douglas MacArthur that we have to, as leaders, be able to feel the heartbeat of where the people are at. I say in my leadership training, you can't go so far ahead of the people that they lose sight of you, because then they'll start wandering in any direction. Leaders, biblical leaders, walk up front. They lead from the front, not shouts from behind. They say, this is the way, walk ye in it. They say, follow me. Jesus said, follow me. The biblical leaders always are ahead, and the followers come after them and learn from them and walk in their, as it were, their shadow, and watch their standards, example, message. I like this one. Sheryl Sandberg. She said, leadership is not about being in the spotlight. It's about making others shine brighter. I thought that's good. It awakens, again, the destiny in others. Here's another John Maxwell saying, the spiritual leader should outpace the led, so that those behind will follow in their leader's path at their pace. Which, again, I spoke about that. It takes wisdom to pace yourself, because at times you could be light years away, but to be able to put the brakes to walk that you're not so far ahead that the people lose sight of you. There's many other definitions here. I want to give you my definition. This good one that I have. My definition of a leader is this, which will go with part 2 of what I'm going to share tonight. A leader knows where they're going. A spiritual leader knows where they're going. That's called vision. Knows how to get there. That's called strategy. And if they look over their shoulder, there's people following them. Now, if there's no one following them, they may have a God-given assignment, a task, a mission, but they're not a leader. Leaders attract followers. There's a certain magnetism that leaders have. You see that in Nehemiah when he goes into Jerusalem. He's a servant. He's never led. Maybe he oversaw some cooks and servants and stuff in his duties as the cupbearer. I'm sure he delegated some authority. But let's face it, handling the king's table and the court is a pretty big deal because his life is in your hands. But compared to building a city, it's like being, you working in a restaurant with a couple of cooks and waiters and receptionists, and now suddenly you've got a whole city of people, and they're disillusioned, depressed, down in the mouth, feel sorry for themselves. And to awaken the destiny, you have to know where you're going. You have to know how to get there, and you need to have the magnetism to draw people to follow you, and then to make them a part of that strategy and vision. So it's the transference of vision, isn't it? It's so important. And so a leader is someone who knows where they're going, knows how to get there, and has people following them. And a good leader takes compassion on the people following them, doesn't use them and abuse them, but makes them great, makes them fulfill their God-given destiny and calling, especially in the biblical context. Something that I've learned in the kingdom, and certainly it'll come up this weekend when I teach on faith. I found in the kingdom everything is interrelated. We can teach on faith, we can teach on vision, we can teach on leadership, we can teach on holiness, we can teach on righteousness, we can teach on identification, we can teach on prayer, on fasting. Not one biblical teaching stands on its own. It's surrounded by multiple other teachings, attitudes, giftings, callings, And certainly leadership in itself is not a standalone thing. Leadership has around it vision, strategy, followership, compassion, the ability to communicate the word, the message, the vision. It's the ability to problem solve, to heal, to help. It's not one-dimensional. And whatever angle you look in at it, it seems to be, wow, that's so important. But then you come from another angle and you see, without that angle, you can have strong vision, but without compassion, vision, you're going to leave the people what may be behind because you lack compassion. So for me, a leader has to be very balanced. Jesus was very balanced. You've heard me say this. He was so balanced. He walked on water. He was whole in his soul, in his mind, in his spirit, in his body, in his relationship. He had conviction. He had strength. He stood up against injustice. He threw out the money changers, turned over their tables. He was strong, but then he goes walking way off the route to go reach one woman sitting at the side of it or going to draw water from the well. There was no way that well in Samaria was part of his journey, but he was willing to go for one woman to reach her, who incidentally was the first one that he revealed, I am the Messiah. He didn't reveal it to Israel. He revealed it to a Samaritan. So you look at his balance, even when he's under pressure, his friend has died, and he doesn't go running over. He takes his time to get there. He was never under pressure. He always seemed to, like even in the midst of the storm, he's sleeping or walking on water, depending on the approach he has. He was in control of himself, of the elements, of his will, of his words. Never a man spoke like this one. He speaks with authority, with great knowledge, wisdom, skill, understanding, compassion. Everything he did was perfect. And so when I talk about leadership, I want to say that it's not one-dimensional. You can be a great leader in public and be miserable in private. You can be a tremendous communicator and yet pathetic in organization and administration. And we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. I surround myself with a great team because I know if I don't have the right team around me, I cannot do what I do. And so I build with people that are better than me where I'm weak. It's kind of like in marriage, the husband and the wife are meant to complement each other. They're not meant to be exactly the same. That's a disaster in the making. They ought to be like opposites in many ways, and then they find that balance in each other, living off the strengths of each other, and then recognizing the limitations in each other, and then being comfortable in our limitations because we know that the spouse makes up for where I'm weak. So the same in leadership, we have strengths and we have weaknesses. And if you're not strong in areas, you have to surround yourself with people that are strong. Jesus never needed anyone to make him better. He was the perfection. But we need to understand that we don't embody everything that he has in perfection. We have giftings, anointings, talents, and abilities, and some of them are more dominant than others. We can work at what we're weak at. For example, when I say hate, it's actually maybe stronger than that. I hate administration. People think I'm like this expert administrator. I'm not gifted in it. I make myself do it because I just don't have someone that can do what I have to do. And until I find that person, I've got to keep doing it. I don't like answering hundreds of emails. I want someone that can do it. But when I get someone, they can't word it like me. So I've got to word it. There are certain things you cannot delegate. There are certain things you can't give away. And if you don't have the right people around you, you can't give that away. You have to do it. You've got it. And Jesus could do it because he was balanced. We work at ourselves as leaders. We recognize our strengths. We recognize our weaknesses. And if we can't surround ourselves with someone to make up where we're weak, you have to learn what to do to become an expert at it. You can't excuse yourself. Because as a leader, which president said it? The buck stops here. Teddy Roosevelt, was it? Harry Truman. There you go. I'm a South African. What do I know? I know it was one of them. Close enough. A couple of generations away. But here's the thing is that the buck stops with you as a leader. Even if I delegate something to you and you don't do it, I can't blame you. I have to say, I gave you something and I didn't put in communication where I could monitor what you're doing, and I lost control of that. I can't blame you as a leader. I have to take responsibility. If God told me to do something and I delegate it to you and you don't do it, God gave it to me. I've got to take the responsibility of that thing. Leadership does take responsibility. And where you are good and strong, that's awesome. But where you're weak, it's not an excuse to stay weak in that area. You've got to either find someone or become good at it. I read books, and I call it time management. I prefer self-management because you can't manage time. You can only manage yourself. But I read books on it. Why? Because I could laze off so easily. I'm writing a book on procrastination. I'm just perfecting my skills so that my book just be laced with revelation. Sometimes you have to dig deep inside of yourself to awaken what's not naturally there or what's not supernaturally there, because we're not gifted in every area. I found some leaders are great in public, but they're weak with their team. But that's not an excuse to stay weak. Study how to build teams. Study how to build people around you to make them feel connected to what you're doing. I read a lot of books on team building. Why? Because I recognize I've got to become strong in that. If I've got a good team around me, I can't just say, well, we've arrived. I've got to keep studying those critical areas that are not natural for me. Even when I was in the military, I worked with a very small unit. We were a team, but we were a small team. Now I have a big team around me. I have to learn how to work with bigger teams. It's much easier to manage a couple of people than a lot of people. And so you have to learn skills. You have to learn how to delegate, how to follow up and follow through and make sure that the task is completed. And so leaders carry great responsibility. Jesus embodied all of that. I've got about 5 minutes. Let me quickly wrap up with these. And here were some things that I saw leaders ought to have. The first is called the power of attraction, or the magnetic attraction. It's not an outer beauty. It's the ability to somehow connect people with yourself and with what God has given you to do. Nehemiah, like I said, he epitomized that. Jesus had that. Because you think about it, those fishermen, they were cleaning their nets, and Jesus had walked past, but if you read, he had spent time with them before. Am I correct? He was with them for the whole night. When he walked past, he said, "Follow me and I will make you." It was such a compelling call that struck the depth of their being that they left their boats, they left their nets, they left their father's business, their inheritance, Peter left his wife. He was a married man to follow Jesus for the 3 years. Later on, his wife comes. If you watch the Jesus movie, you'll see her showing up periodically. That's biblical. That's in imaginations. But ultimately, she would die before Peter. She would be crucified. She would be killed before Peter. Peter died after his wife. She became a very committed follower as well. But yes, the thing is, they left everything. Why? Because he had that attraction, that pull. And we know that there was nothing comely about him on the outside. There was no outer beauty that made him this attractive leader. The scripture is very clear about it. He had this inner glory that drew them. And we need as leaders to ask God to awaken that magnetism in us. I find when I'm working with a lot of pastors, they have vision, they have passion, they have conviction, they're great teachers and preachers, but some of them lack attraction, the ability to pull people in to engage them. As a leader in the making, ask God to give you what was in Jesus, the attraction. Number 2, and we'll deal with this in the next session, the power of vision. How many of you have vision? Okay. How many of you could say vision has you? It's a whole nother level of vision. You can have vision, but does vision have you? I know, Sylvia, vision has you because you're just like devoted to your cause, to what you're doing. That's the difference between success and failure. Jesus didn't just have vision. Vision had him. That compelling vision and sense of purpose and destiny. And leaders must have that. That's why I said my definition of leadership, a leader knows where he's going or she's going. Vision. Knows how to get there. Strategy. You can have vision without strategy. Guess what? You're going to have a nightmare. If you don't have strategy, you'll never fulfill vision, which is like project management. Ever of you studied project management? That's exactly what strategy is. And you often find churches have vision. They'll even have a vision statement or a mission statement, but they lack strategy how to fulfill it. For example, let's say, and Pastor Jason, Pastor Sarah, and I were talking about this. We were talking about soul winning, each one reach one. That's a great vision statement, isn't it? If it were possible, if each one of you could reach one, disciple them, this group would double in 1 year. If we set an annual goal that in this year, God give you one soul to reach. That's not like impossible, is it? Smith Wigglesworth asked God for a soul every day. And he'd stand outside his plumbing business and wait, and God say, that person, he'd go minister to. That was his God-given goal, one soul a day in his lunch hour. So I could cast vision to each one, reach one. But if I don't give you a strategy on how to do that, guess what it's going to be? It's going to be a statement on the wall, a banner on the overhead, but it won't get in your heart. It won't get in your mouth. It won't get in your feet. And we will just have great statements on the wall. Strategy. With vision, you've got to have strategy. Strategic thinking. Another thing is a good leader has to have communication skills. Interpersonal, public. I have the 3 C's of leadership. What are they, Pastor Jason? That's right. There's actually 4 C's. What's the 4th C, Pastor Sarah? Coffee. You got coffee in my fruit basket. I thought you got it. I need to rewrite that chapter. The 3 C's of leadership: communication, communication, communication. The 4 C's of leadership: communication, 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 coffee. Communicate the gospel, Communicate the word, the teaching, communicate the vision, communicate the strategy. If you don't communicate, that's the power of the kingdom, is in word. It's not just in deed, it's in word, because those words become contagions that awaken destiny, that say, let us rise and let us build, and they put their hands to that good work. Many people will be won by our slogans, but they'll never say, let us rise, let us build, and put their hands to the good work. That's the ultimate of communication that I saw in Nehemiah, and I see it in Jesus. Follow me and I will make you. They left their nets at his word, at his invitation, and then at the end of his life, go and make disciples of all nations. And those pretty ordinary people became extraordinary world changers because of the communication of the cause. I've come to the end of this session. Before I close for probably a 5-minute break or something, are there any questions so far? You've got the notes, you can study them on the ministry of Jesus. So much in there. I think there's 60 pages or something. I prepared today, I have 165 pages for these 2 sessions. Of course, I've done 1 page. But I was sharing at supper. Thank you for those that served the supper, by the way. I was sharing at supper that when I teach, I'll put in about 14 hours to the Word for a 45-minute session. But it's actually not for you, it's for me. That I've covered that subject so well that I can speak it with conviction, that it's become mine. And you'll learn that as communicators, as leaders in the making. It's the law of the farm. If you sow into it, you'll reap from it. If you fly by the seat of your pants, you may win 1 or 2 things, but the truth is it's in diligence that you succeed. Questions on leadership modeled after Jesus so far? He was a servant leader. He was a sacrificial leader. He was a self-disciplined leader. He was a faithful leader. He was faithful in all of God's house, just as Moses was. So many qualities: servant leader, sacrificial leader, selfless leader. So many great qualities. All right. Pastor Joe.
Check. I do have to laugh because there is one thing, Dr. Leon, I firsthand know. There's been times I've woken up at like 5 in the morning being like, all right, start my prayer time, and there's Dr. Leon. Good morning, Pastor Jason, just finished a chapter. I'm like, what? So,